Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're diving into a deeply complex and honestly highly sensitive geopolitical situation. We're going to unpack some really startling recent reports about the United Arab Emirates and a massive wave of sudden deportations targeting Pakistani workers. It's a story that weaves together international diplomacy, billions of dollars in loans, and most importantly, everyday livelihoods. Our goal today is just to neutrally lay out the facts, the personal testimonies, and the wider geopolitical context as reported by sources like New Lines Magazine and regional analysts. We want to help you clearly understand exactly what's allegedly happening behind the scenes.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the central mystery here is both abrupt and really alarming. According to recent reports, thousands of Pakistani nationals, many of whom have lived, worked, and literally built their entire lives in the UAE over decades, are just suddenly vanishing from their workplaces and homes. And we're not talking about a standard legal process here. They are reportedly being detained and deported overnight. So the big question we're answering today is why? How exactly does a working-class driver or a regular IT professional get swept up in a massive international dragnet?
To get to the bottom of all this, here's our roadmap for today. First, the silent deportations. Second, stories from the detained. Third, the geopolitical context. Fourth, Pakistan's diplomatic dilemma. Fifth, the media silence. And finally, what happens next?
All right, starting with Section 1, the silent deportations. Just how big is this alleged operation?
Well, the scale reported by sources, including a really detailed investigation by New Lines Magazine and statements from community leaders, is absolutely staggering. We are looking at roughly 5,000 Pakistani families affected. That translates to a total of about 15,000 individuals. To put that into perspective, that's thousands of people who have reportedly been swept up and forced out of the country, leaving behind their homes, their jobs, and their hard-earned assets, all while the Pakistani government allegedly remains completely silent on the whole thing.
And this brilliantly illustrates the starkly systematic nature of what is reportedly happening. It isn't just random. According to testimonies, this follows a really strict three-step process. Step 1, individuals are arrested suddenly by the CID, that's the Criminal Investigation Department, often right from their office desks or just walking down the street. Step 2, they're shuffled through police stations until they end up at the Al Awir Detention Center, which is a well-known holding facility. And then Step 3, they are put on a plane and deported back to Pakistan. No formal charges, no court dates, no explanation whatsoever.
Now, to really grasp what that three-step process looks like in reality, we have to zoom in to the individual level. Moving on to Section 2, stories from the detained.
Journalists have gathered some truly harrowing personal testimonies that show just how wide this net is being cast. Take Tahir, for example. He was a government employee for the Dubai Roads and Transport Authority, and he was simply handcuffed and taken right in the middle of a night shift. Or look at Intikhab and Paima, who are sent home to Pakistan on quote-unquote holiday and essentially just vanished. Their families were actually left frantically posting their passport details online just to prove they exist. Then there's an unnamed 25-year-old IT professional. Now, interestingly, he's a Sunni Muslim, but he was reportedly detained merely because security cameras likely caught him visiting an Imam Bargah, a Shia congregation hall, with a friend during Muharram. It seems the dragnet is targeting anyone with perceived Shia affiliations, completely regardless of their actual political involvement or even their actual religious sect.
The abruptly discriminatory nature of these interrogations is really highlighted by the reported experience of Zahir Khan, who's a driver from Skardu. Get this. He was arrested at the Mall of the Emirates just while depositing some money. The officers explicitly asked if he was Shia or Sunni. When Zahir replied, "Alhamdulillah, I am Shia," the officer allegedly responded, "Then the matter is clear," and basically threatened him against asking any more questions. A week later, he was deported in the exact same clothes he was arrested in.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it captures the undeniable psychological toll this takes on people. Just listen to this quote from Kamar Abbas. He's a 47-year-old who worked as a driver in Dubai for 24 years. Detainees report having their hands and feet bound and being forced into blue prison uniforms. Imagine that. For a man who spent a quarter of a century working peacefully in a country, that sudden shift to being treated like a high-level criminal literally made him believe his execution was imminent.
And it actually gets worse. The sources detail some extreme blackmail tactics allegedly used to guarantee these deportees stay silent once they're back in Pakistan. Multiple individuals reported being stripped naked and filmed by authorities, and these authorities explicitly threatened to publish those humiliating videos on social media if the deportees even dared to speak to the press or complain about their treatment back home.
So you have to ask, why is this happening? Why target working-class Pakistanis? Well, this brings us to Section 3. The geopolitical context.
According to the analysis in the source material, this whole thing traces back to some serious, high-level international friction. It's like a giant puzzle. Following a major escalation in tensions between the United States and Iran, Pakistan attempted to step in and play a mediating role to try and calm things down. However, the UAE, which views Iran as a direct adversary and relies heavily on a strong U.S. stance against them, allegedly viewed Pakistan's mediation as a betrayal, or at the very least, as Pakistan getting way too cozy with the U.S.-Iran peace process. And as a consequence, the UAE allegedly began retaliating against Pakistan.
But that retaliation wasn't just limited to deportations, it was massively financial. As a direct result of this diplomatic fallout, the UAE suddenly demanded the immediate repayment of a $3.5 billion loan from Pakistan. Yes, billion with a B. This was a catastrophic financial shock, completely designed to punish Islamabad. So, the crucial point is making sure we accurately identify the true root cause here. Is this purely a religious issue or is it a geopolitical one? The sources make a really interesting contrast between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. You see, Saudi Arabia is also a fierce regional adversary of Iran. Yet, Saudi Arabia has absolutely not initiated any mass deportation of Pakistani Shias working within its borders.
Plus, the source explicitly points out another fascinating detail. Indian Shias living and working in the UAE are reportedly not facing these deportations at all. This specific nuance really isolates the issue. It strongly suggests that we aren't looking at a blanket religious purge, but rather a targeted geopolitical strike, specifically aimed at punishing the Pakistani state by basically using its vulnerable diaspora as leverage.
And that leads us directly into Section 4. Pakistan's diplomatic dilemma. How exactly does a country handle this kind of intense pressure? Well, financially speaking, Pakistan was in a massive bind. I mean, they didn't exactly have $3.5 billion in liquid cash just lying around to hand back to the UAE. So, other international players had to step in. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the International Monetary Fund essentially had to bail Pakistan out to cover this sudden debt recall. As you can imagine, this further complicated an already tangled web of regional alliances, pushing Pakistan even deeper into financial reliance on other Gulf states, while its relationship with the UAE just continued to fracture. Now, on an ideological level, the source offers a really sharp critique of UAE nationalism. During the height of all these regional tensions, the slogan, "We are all Emiratis," was heavily promoted. However, analysts argue this is actually a highly constructed identity, meaning it's a fairly recent and somewhat fragile narrative. It highlights a massive, glaring contradiction. A nation built largely on the sweat of South Asian migrant labor over the last 50 years can seemingly overnight completely discard those same workers. They're confiscating their livelihoods the very moment the geopolitical winds shift. So with 15,000 people displaced and billions of dollars moving around, you might be wondering, why on earth isn't this the top story on every single news channel? Let's get into Section 5, the media silence. The source material points to a few distinct reasons for this massive media blackout. First off, there is no free press in the UAE to investigate this locally. Second, both the UAE and Pakistani governments officially deny that these deportations are even happening. But the third point? This is perhaps the most shocking revelation regarding Pakistan's domestic media. The source alleges there is widespread self-censorship. And why? Because many prominent Pakistani journalists and media owners have heavily invested their own personal wealth into Dubai real estate. They are terrified that if they report on these alleged human rights abuses, the UAE government will simply target their personal assets next. So where does this leave the victims? Let's move to our final section, Section 6, what happens next? Let's move to Aria and see how this builds into a completely unresolved economic tragedy. These deportees didn't just lose their jobs, because they were given absolutely no warning and are slapped with lifetime travel bans, millions of dollars in personal assets. We're talking bank accounts, fully paid off houses, active businesses have all been frozen and left behind in the UAE. Literally entire life savings wiped out in a matter of hours. Which brings us to our final, lingering question. What actually happens to all those frozen assets and properties left behind by these workers? And more broadly, as nations play these massive games of geopolitical chess, moving billions of dollars and shifting alliances, what is the true devastating human cost for the ordinary people caught right in the middle? It's a sobering reminder of just how quickly macro-level politics can destroy micro-level lives. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I hope it helped clarify a very complex issue. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.